are going to begin here, as we generally do, with our large square-headed brush. I'm going to ensure that it is damp and wipe off any excess water. Then I'm going to go grab two pigments, the first being a titanium white and the second being a primary yellow. I'm then going to mix the two together on my canvas in the sky. I'm using a very soft touch of my brush to ensure I don't get much of a streaky aesthetic. The goal here is to render something that is very consistently smooth and void of any impressions. We're using a primary yellow here in the water as well because it will be reflecting from the sky. There will also be reflections of trees and rocks, the bridge, all of these different things, but we'll add those in later. Right now we're just building our base with this initial color. Now from there I'm going to grab an old square-headed brush. As you can see, the bristles kind of leaf off in varying directions, so when you make a dabbing motion with them, you render a litany of implications. If you don't have one of these, don't worry, you can make one very simply by taking a regular square-headed or flat-headed brush, peeling back the bristles, and rendering something a little bit more rough. Now here I'm going to mix a green, however this green is going to be yellow dominant. And we mix green by using a primary yellow and a primary blue. In this mixture you want a lot more primary yellow than primary blue, and we want it to be very yellow heavy because we're working right now on the foliage that is closest to the sky. This is right where the opening and our light is coming from. So this foliage is receiving a lot of light. The light is also penetrating a lot of our foliage, of our leaves, and it's brightening it. It's giving it more of that yellow, more of a golden look than a green. As we move farther back into the painting and more inwards, things get darker. Things get more of their innate color. They become more green. Now after applying that, I did decide that I wanted to kind of brighten up the edges a little bit more. And you can do that. You can go back. You can change things. That's what's so fantastic about acrylic paints. They dry very quickly, so if you don't like something, you can go back and rework it very, very quickly. And that's what I'm doing right here. You'll also notice that as I add this additional application, we're slowly losing sight of our initial drawing, which is good because in the end we don't want those black lines being in there as well. If you find them difficult to get rid of, just recognize that you'll just have to do a couple more additional layers. Now here you can see that we're mixing up again with our primary yellow, and I'm going to work in the darker areas. As we get down from the trees, as we move downwards from the top area, things will progressively get a little bit darker, but in the very, very far distance, you don't want to incorporate pigments like a pure black, because you want to save all of your stark values for the foreground. That's really what's going to interject a lot of depth into your painting. So in the background, you want it to be brightest at the top and darker at the bottom, but it's not really dark. It's just dark in comparison to that very bright area at the top. Now, I would also like to note that we are dragging the bottom of this foliage down. We're now working on some bushes, we're working on the grass, and because this whole area is farther away from the light, it is going to be darker in general. However, we're still not using the black, and we will be adding highlights to this area. Here again, we'll mix some green, but we'll make it a much, much brighter green. So we mixed our yellow and our blue, but then we also grabbed a lot of titanium white to brighten it up, and then we grabbed some additional yellow to reintroduce that saturation, because the white does desaturate it. Now I'm going to go in and add some additional detail in the background. I'm doing this to trees and to the bushes and foliage on the bottom area. However, we're only highlighting the areas that will be receiving the most amount of light. The bottom of these bushes are not going to be receiving a lot of light, and the backs of these trees are also not going to be receiving a lot of light. Now we are going to grab a small square-headed brush, ensure that it is damp, just like our first brush, and we're going to grab some burnt umber, some titanium white, some primary yellow, and we'll just kind of continue to mix these pigments until we have something where we feel comfortable that it is a good representation of what a tree would look like in the far distance. We have the burnt umber because that is the innate color that we think of when we think of trees and the base of them. But we also have the yellow because there's a lot of yellow golden light being reflected down here onto them. And we have the titanium white to thicken it. Now, from there, I'm creating little offshoots of our branches, as you can see, and they get smaller and smaller the farther you go upwards. And the best way to do that is to incorporate more water and to apply less pressure with your brush. When you apply more pressure, the bristles open up, they expand, they clump, right? And you get a much more thick application. But when you can apply the smallest amount of pressure, when you're not even touching the bristles to the canvas, when it's just paint on paint, that is when you render the smoothest, smallest application. Now, I'm done with a lot of those branches, so I'm going to go back to my old square-headed brush. I'm making a very bright yellow, something very similar to what we have in the back of our painting, and I'm beginning to apply this over portions of our trees, as you can see here. I'm actually going to grab a bit of our primary yellow, a bit of our titanium white, and I'm going to create some dividing lines in between our land and our water. This is more of a finishing touch. This is something you do with an area once you're fairly happy with it, and I'm trying to ensure that it's very, very subtle in the background. And as you get closer to the foreground, I'm applying a little bit more pressure. I'm allowing the line to be a little bit more stark. I'm allowing it to be a little bit more wide. And we're just progressively increasing it just like that. You can see it trailing off into the distance. It's great because it creates leading lines. It divides our subjects as they need to be. So the goal here is to build up the layers. We already have the very dark base, and now we need to add some light to it. But I'm not jumping immediately to my brightest version, my brightest pigment. I want to build this up in intervals. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm picking the side of the tree, which is facing our light source, which as you can see is up to the top of the painting, and I'm beginning to illuminate it by adding a slightly brighter version of the pigment that we initially used for the foundation. So I had my dark base, then I applied my second middle tone, and now I'm going back in with the highlight. Now, in the meantime here, I've been painting in the base layer for the foliage and bushes in the foreground. I'm doing so with a much darker green than what we've used before, as you can see. As we move forward in the painting, remember, we use our darker values, more Mars black than ever before. And we'll go back in and we'll re-add our highlights after that once it is fully dry. Because if we don't let it dry, it will all blend together and we just won't get the highlights that we need. We let the left side dry for a while now, and I can begin to draw in our bushes. You want to ensure that your bushes are different heights, different widths, different sizes. You want them to be eclectic and interesting. You want them to all have their own little personalities. Then I'm going to grab some burnt umber, a little bit of titanium white to thicken the pigment, and some Mars black to darken it. Then I'm going to begin applying this new mixed pigment to our bridge. I'm just kind of painting in between the lines at this point, and if you find that you've actually lost your bridge, that you've painted over said lines, again, don't worry about it. You can go back to the start of the lesson to see how it was placed on the canvas and you can redraw it, or you can use the digital sketch. Now, here that I have the general silhouette finished, I'm actually beginning to add in the highlighted portions, and that means a much brighter brown. This is more so actually a middle tone. We'll go in later with a bit of a brighter tone, but we just want to build that up in the same way we did on our trees. We want to have our darker tone, and then we add our middle tone, and then we'll add our lighter tone on top of that. And each time we'll show part of the dark, part of the middle, and then the light on the very top. Now I'm going back to my palette and creating a dark gray. You saw there was a Mars black, a little bit of titanium white. Here we're grabbing some additional burnt umber. And now I'm going to work on the base layer for the rock. I'm waiting for the top of the trees and foliage to dry. I'm also waiting for the pathway to dry. So I'm kind of just moving from subject to subject in the meantime before I go back in and add the additional midtones and highlights like we did for all of our initial foliage and our bridge. I'm applying this highlighted gray pigment to the edge of our rock. For the most part, our rock will be a gray. However, you might want to add in a little bit of a yellow as well from the light that is coming from the background. Remember that our light and the way we render subjects is very much a combination of their innate color and the color that is kind of presented through the atmosphere, through the lighting, whatever that may be. Maybe it's natural in the painting, maybe it's artificial like a lamp or a post. But we just need to keep in mind the type of lighting and the warming and cooling effect it will have on the subject. Now, from there, I'm going to be taking this smaller round-headed brush, and I'm going to be working in some light. Here we have a very watered-down yellow and titanium white, and I'm making the stroke multiple times. I'm applying my brush very lightly to the canvas. I'm doing this because I want to ensure that I get the stroke in the right way, in the right pattern. So you might even want to do it kind of on top of the painting a couple of times first. Ensure that your stroke is exactly where you want it to be. Then you apply it with a couple of strokes, kind of shifting it in the way you want it to be, and then you can kind of use your finger, as you saw me do there, to soften it and ensure that it has nice edges. You don't want these to be sharp, you want them to be a little bit more soft, the edges to be a little bit more feathered, and using your finger and using the smaller round-headed brush will help you do that. Then I took a bright blue, it's a mixture of titanium white and primary blue, and I began to add in some additional flowers. This blue is great because it's right beside green on the color wheel, so they work well together, but it's also right beside purple. So it connects all of the colors in the way that they need to be. It works with the blue, it works with the purple. It's that connective tissue that really makes it all come together very cohesively. Hey there, it's Ryan O'Rourke. I truly hope you enjoyed today's little extra video. It was essentially a cut-up version of one of the many hour-long lessons which we offer over on patreon.com. Over there you'll also find digital sketches of the 10-minute painting lessons, digital sketches of these hour-long painting lessons, and a bunch of reference photos as well. So if any of that interests you, or if you just want to support the channel, go over there and check it out. It is a pleasure to make these long form videos, and I love to share them with all of you. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next Saturday with a new video, and above all, as always, stay creative.